Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight.
In our post-pandemic recovery, no one, not anyone, can be left behind.
Mayor Lori Lightfoot presents her budget proposal for 2022. We break down the highlights and hear from the mayor herself.
This is a fair, good faith compromise.
Pot's coming downtown. City Council loosens zoning restrictions for cannabis dispensaries, but some say it doesn't do enough for social equity. We talk with older people about that decision and the mayor's budget proposal.
We hope that we will soon have a vaccine for young children that's safe and effective.
Children could soon be eligible to receive the COVID vaccine. This as governments are still grappling with vaccine mandates.
It's the company's steepest hike in 6 years. Geico is raising auto insurance prices for Illinois customers. That and more from Cranes.
$1 billion crosses our shared border every day.
The U.S. and Mexico restart high-level economic talks after 4 years to address trade and migration. We have local reaction.
And meet a Chicago artist who explores the city to find beautiful details in some of its grittiest corners. But first, some of today's top stories. Another deadly summer weekend of gun violence, including an officer-involved shooting and death. More than 50 people were shot in all, 9 fatally, in 45 separate shooting incidents between 6 p.m. Friday and midnight Sunday. Now, the Chicago Police Department says officers were responding to a domestic disturbance call on Sunday when they encountered a male armed with a knife. One officer opened fire and killed the 28-year-old man. The Civilian Office of Police Accountability is investigating a shooting, as it does with all police-related shootings.
We do know our officer discharged their weapon. We do know the offender is deceased. But all the things that happened in sequence between when the officers got there, what did the victim do, what did the offender do, that's for COPA to investigate.
As we mentioned at the top, downtown Chicago could soon be sprinkled with pot shops. City Council approved the measure today to allow cannabis retail stores in the city's downtown area, with the exception of Michigan Avenue and State Street in the Loop. The mayor says the plan is intended to further spur on Black and Latino representation in that industry that has mostly been comprised of white business owners to this point. Still, some council members say they don't believe this plan will fix that equity gap.
And here we are again saying the sky's falling, we need to hurry up and pass this so social equity people can get a piece of the pie. And half of these people are fronts, the other half gonna sell their license.
Is this a perfect ordinance? No. Are we in the process of drafting the 10 Commandments and chiseling this into stone? No. We can always come back and revisit this ordinance and make tweaks as necessary.
And we have full coverage of today's City Council meeting and budget address coming up, including an interview with Mayor Lightfoot. And an alderperson who was hit in a physical altercation this weekend was back in City Council today. Alderman James Kappelman says he's fine after being attacked in Uptown, which is in his ward, over the weekend. Kappelman says he knows and has been attacked before by this alleged assailant, and he attended City Council meeting and budget briefing by the mayor today. A small, unknown, up-and-coming band is playing at the Metro in Wrigleyville tonight, and it's caused quite a stir. Concertgoers lined up for blocks when the surprise show by Metallica was announced this morning. The iconic metal band decided to do the impromptu show at the small local venue and is charging $20 to get in. It's only the band's second show after COVID-19 put a halt to all of the touring. Concertgoers must be fully vaccinated to be able to get in, and the venue announced earlier this afternoon that, of course, the show has been sold out. And up next, we break down Mayor Lori Lightfoot's 2022 budget, so please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Mayor Lori Lightfoot today presented her 2022 $16.7 billion budget proposal to City Council members. Her plan to close a projected $733 million budget gap relies heavily on federal relief funds as well as savings and cuts. The mayor's budget proposal also bets that the city's economy will improve quickly when the COVID pandemic finally wanes. As the city recovers, Lightfoot called on residents and city leaders to channel the spirit of those who rebuilt the city from the ashes of the Great Fire.
On the eve of the 150th anniversary of the Great Chicago Fire, let's match and exceed the determination of our ancestors who literally rebuilt this city out of the charred ashes and laid the foundation for the great global city that we are today.
And WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more. Welcome back, of course, Heather. So before we get into the details, though, let's just run through some of these budget highlights. There are no new taxes or fees, but property taxes were already set to rise by more than $48 million to cover the increase in the cost of living and the city's infrastructure plan. The budget also proposes a $31 million universal basic income pilot program, which will be in the form of $500 a month per year for 5,000 families, plus $52 million to expand mental health services, $189 million to the Chicago Police Department to cover pay raises approved in their newly approved labor contract, and $240 million to build or preserve 4,000 homes for low-income Chicagoans. So, Heather, what would you say was the main theme or message of the mayor's proposed budget this year?
Well, as we just heard from the mayor, she really sought to cast this budget as a way out of what she called a, quote, brutal, unquote, chapter in Chicago's history, and that this budget was going to staunch the flow of red ink that was created by the economic catastrophe of the COVID-19 pandemic, and also make targeted investments to address the systemic problems facing Chicago: racism, poverty, and a lack of a safe, affordable place to live. So she was channeling Daniel Burnham and saying that she planned no little plans, and that's what this budget does.
So the mayor said that her plan contained no new tax or significant fee increases. Is that accurate?
It is yes and no. So as you said at the top, the city council last year approved a plan to automatically hike Chicago property owners' taxes based on the increase in the cost of living. That will generate somewhere in the neighborhood of about $23 million for the city. Also, at the same time, the bill for the city's massive infrastructure plan is starting to come due, and that will mean that the city will have to collect $25 million more to start paying off that $1.4 billion in debt. Just in the last hour or so, the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce president and CEO Jack Lavin called on the mayor to rethink those plans, saying, look, if we've got all this federal relief fund to fill all of these other needs, those property taxes are not something that Chicagoans can bear right now as the pandemic continues to rage.
Now, after another violent summer, Lightfoot also talked about a lot about making Chicago safer. Of course, everyone wants that, but how does she propose doing that with this budget?
Well, she is really taking a page from progressive groups, including the United Working Families political organization, that called for investments in things like violence prevention programs and mental health services. That $52 million of new funding for mental health services includes $15 million to expand the city's pilot program to send not police officers, but mental health professionals to Chicagoans who call 911 for help rather than an armed officer. A lot of progressive aldermen are hopeful that that will build trust in the city and it will prevent tragedies like the one where we saw where Kentonio Legrier was killed, and of course, any numerous of issues that the city has faced.
Of course. So Heather, before we let you go, what happens next? When does this budget get finalized?
Well, the hearings will start on Friday, and the mayor is hoping that the final vote will come before Halloween. That is an accelerated timeline. Usually we go through this in October and November, but this is a compressed and accelerated budget program because we've got that $1.9 billion in American Rescue Plan money to spend.
Okay. Heather Sharon, great work as always. Thank you.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website, WTTW.com/news. And now, Paris, over to you for more on the budget proposal.
Thanks, Brandis. The devil's always in the details, but as we just heard, the mayor today has touted nearly $2 billion in new spending on things from affordable housing to cash assistance for struggling families to the arts. But can these new programs be sustained amid perennially rising pension and debt obligations? So here to talk about her $16.7 billion budget proposal is Chicago's Mayor, Lori Lightfoot. Mayor Lightfoot, welcome. And we should mention that you're joined by your financial team, CFO Susie Park, Jenny Bennett, Budget Director, and Controller Reshma Soni. We welcome you and all of you to Chicago tonight. So, Mayor, I want to start. Actually, the spending here is about $1.5 billion over last year's budget. Will the city be able to maintain this level of spending in future years without big property tax increases?
Well, that's certainly our goal, and thank you for inviting us to be here tonight. Look, we know that in this time, where hopefully we are finally going to be putting the pandemic in our rearview mirror, that we've got to be bold and transformative in the investment that we make to make a real difference, not only today and tomorrow, but into the future. We have real immediate needs that are met by the investments that we propose, but we also are making long-term bets on our neighborhoods in our downtown area to stimulate business activity, to make sure that we're providing jobs and opportunity all across the city, that we are deepening our commitment to healthcare and mental health, and supporting our young people and also those who are most vulnerable, our seniors, those who are currently facing food insecurity and a whole other host of issues that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. We've got to do both and that's what this budget proposes.
And Mayor, there's about $1.9 billion in total from federal relief funds. About $1.1 billion of that is used to stanch some of this red ink that the city endured over about 3 years that were influenced by the pandemic. As you know, progressive alder people want more of that federal relief money to go to some of the programs you're mentioning. So will there have to be compromise in that number?
Look, I think that we have struck the right balance. We spent a lot of time from the very moment that we understood that we were going to be getting significant resources from the federal government to be responsible fiscal stewards of those tax dollars, to make sure that we were making and continuing to make interventions that got our structural budget balanced, but also really responding to the moment. There are people that are in need and hurting all over our city. That's what we talked about today. But more importantly, that's what we heard. We have very robust budget engagement, probably more than certainly in recent times. And there were very consistent themes. But the bottom line is people wanted to make sure that we showed up for them, that we were investing in them, in their families, in their communities. And I think that's what this budget does.
And Mayor, we mentioned some of these rising costs at the top. There's $250 million more in statutorily required payments to the pension funds, $275 million more for retroactive pay increases for police officers thanks to the new labor contract. Now, you and your team have said you're refinancing about $1.2 billion in debt to pay for a lot of this. Can you be more specific on how that math works?
Well, I'm going to start it, then I'm going to invite our CFO, Jenny Bennett, into the team. You can see Reshma Soni, our comptroller, Jenny Bennett, our CFO, and Susie Park, our budget director. But look, what we know is that we've got to climb our pension ramp. We're required to do that by law, and we're making great strides in doing just that to get our pensions on actuarial balance for the first time in the history of the 4 pension funds. We're very proud of the work that we've done, but it's been hard work. We've rolled up our sleeves. We've made the hard choices. We've not avoided as doing just one-timers. We've looked for a structural balance. And as I indicated in the speech earlier today, over $1 billion in structural solutions since the time that I become mayor, and more to come. Let me invite Jenny Bennett to add to those comments.
Sure. Just to add to the mayor's comments, the $1.2 billion refinancing is a refinancing for savings, the same way you would refinance your mortgage in a good interest rate market. The market is very good for the city, both by way of interest rates and the credit spreads, and so we intend to take advantage of that. The other ramp that the city has also climbed is our scoop and toss ramp, and we're now starting to pay down our debts, not constantly be climbing a mountain of debt. And as a result of that, we're able to now invest in the city in long-term infrastructure projects that we think will benefit the city of Chicago more broadly.
Scoop and toss, of course, that controversial borrowing method that you and your predecessor have tried to sort of limit because of the risk. I also want to talk about investment in the CPD, Mayor. It's going from $1.7 billion to $1.9 billion. You, as you know as well, are progressive older people that want less funding for police and more for mental health services and other programs you've talked about. So will that be a tug of war, too, that funding of the police department?
Well, first of all, the vast majority of that increase is a result of paying for the collective bargaining agreement that we reached with the FOP, but also helping add to resources for our police officers and officer wellness. But the other things that progressive voices have asked for, we're doing in large numbers, whether it's in mental health, affordable housing, taking care of the homeless, addressing food insecurity, and building real transformative investments in communities. All of that is in this budget and more. This is truly a resiliency and recovery budget. There is something that I think should be palatable to most aldermen, and it's a result of all the hard work that was done in previous budgets, and particularly last year, not kicking the can down the road and really making those hard choices. I'm grateful to what I've called the 2021-29, the 29 aldermen who voted for the budget this last year. They made our path to a balanced budget and fiscal responsibility that much easier this year and in the out years. But this is a budget that should win overwhelming support from the members of the City Council. Now, we stand ready to answer questions that will invariably come. There are going to be negotiations that happen, but this is a very solid budget, born of lots and lots of time spent listening to members of the community about what their pain points were, what they wanted to see, and how we should allocate these precious one-time federal dollars.
And obviously you only need 26 votes to pass the budget. We'll see where that goes. You also have a cash payment plan, direct payments, $500 per month to 5,000 of the city's neediest residents. You're calling it the largest basic income plan of any kind in the country. Can you just explain how this will work as well?
Yes, what we know is that there's immediate pain that needs to happen. There are so many families that are sitting around tables like mine did, with their bills spread out and trying to figure out how they're going to juggle the limited dollars that they have. And then a curveball happens that could lead to potential financial ruin. Having an extra $500 a month for those families that are really in need, that are not being covered by other kinds of government relief, whether it be at the city level or the federal level, that can be the difference between solvency and financial ruin. And we need to meet the needs of our residents in this incredible time. It's extraordinary what we've been going through, so we have to use extraordinary tools to meet the needs of our residents. And this $31.5 million that we're proposing really addresses that need.
Mayor, I want to ask you about some of your other initiatives. Your proposal to sue gang members and seize their assets. You've received some pushback on that, saying it's potentially rife with civil rights violations. It'll target Black and Latino Chicagoans. What about that criticism?
Well, first and foremost, I'm always going to stand on the sides of the victims. When we talk about the violence that's happening